Welcome to Memphis Machine.
A Muddy Pig production. I'm Jonathan Bass.
And I'm Carl Casperson, and together we're looking to show off the creative sights and sounds of Memphis, Tennessee.
Amen.
In this episode, Chris Davis. Now, Chris wears many hats. He is a musician. I mean, we're trying to do more than just music.
Have we talked to anyone in the course of recording this podcast that only does one thing?
No. We set out originally to do music, but actually we're looking to exploit as many artistic endeavors as we can, I think, with this.
It's pretty incredible.
That's the goal. That's the goal. I think, Chris, you have to catch Papa Top West Coast Turnaround. Look out for those guys in the Memphis Flyer and online, Facebook. We'll put all those links up. But Chris, a gifted writer, a critic. I think he's a fair critic. Reading his reviews, I think he treats stuff very well. Has some biting opinions, but then again, he probably wouldn't be worth speaking to if he didn't have strong opinions, right?
That's what makes reading his work fun.
I wanted to get Chris in there and try and get an eagle's eye view of his of the city and how he views Memphis, and it was wonderful.
Had a good time talking to Chris. This is my first time meeting him.
Yes. And
well, he's an actor too,
and he does a lot. I can say right off the top, go ahead and search for "Daddy Drinks Because You Cry."
right.
Great song, a great song to sing to your kids at night. Okay, speaking of this podcast, this was brought to you by Snakebite Company, makers of the original Snakebite bottle opener, which I have glossed over in the few other podcasts. We need to talk about our little. It puts two little bites right behind the tab.
Right, the ventilation.
Yes, on the opposite of the tab of a beer can or soda. Doesn't have to be beer, but beer. And it keeps the beer from slapping or sloshing around.
And they also make the Mamba.
And the Mamba, a fantastic bar tool. If you're slinging, if you're working and slinging a product in the bar, you should check out the Mamba bar tool. Snakebite loves making products and apparel for the happy hours, after hours, and weekends when it's your time to relax and just be yourself. Check them out at snakebiteco.com. That's snakebiteco.com. And on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at snakebiteco. Speaking of being yourself, get inspired with Redwire. They are the experts in audio, visual design, and installation in the Mid-South. Redwire Audio Video specializes in the design, installation, rental, and support of high-quality and affordable custom audio, video, lighting, broadcast, and control systems for worship facilities and large public venues. Reach out to Redwire at www.redwireav.com. And, of course, we cannot continue on without mentioning
Ernestine and Hazel's.
God bless Ernestine and Hazel's. The most quirkiest, actually, it's an award-winning, notorious, infamous.
All of those things.
Haunted.
And beloved.
We've been playing there together for 3 years. Jonathan's been playing there even longer than that.
7, I think.
Every Sunday. Pretty much coming down to see the jazz trio. We'll say hi. And you can get yourself a soul burger. Well, see, it's August. And we're upstairs at Ernestine and Hazel's.
Memphis Machine back at Ernestine and
Hazel's.
Hazel's.
And it is not 74 degrees in here.
No.
But that's okay because the vibe shall abide. The vibe will carry us through. Chris Davis is our guest today. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris. You didn't know it was going to go that way, did you?
Chris Davis is a... what are you? How long have you been in Memphis? It's been a while, right?
Came to Memphis to go to school.
It's my beer. I'm going to slam that thing down if I want
College
to. Yes. One more time. I was rude there for a moment. Go ahead.
I came to Memphis in 1985 to go to college.
Yeah.
I was a Rhodes kid. Did 4 years there, summers away. Just kind of got the city stuck on my shoe. I tried to get away a bunch, and I would start missing everything that was wrong with it. And I would have to get back. It just felt like my people were here.
That's lovely. Stuck on my shoe. I like that.
So where'd you move from to go to school?
I was born in Detroit, and then before I'm theoretically supposed to be able to form any memories, but it's not true. I have lots of memories of Detroit. But we moved to Middle Tennessee. That was where I was raised, a little town called Erin, founded by Irish railroad workers, they say. The most Irish small town in the USA. They say, I don't know.
That's cool.
Really?
That which is not naturally green has been painted green. Everything is the Fighting Irish, and they have like a big Irish Day celebration every year. They call it Irish Day because it's mostly Protestant, so they don't call it St. Patrick's Day, but they do let the local priests lead the parade.
That's awesome.
That's like a later concession. I think that's, it's a progressive little town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming up through Rhodes as a young man, you graduated, I take it, right?
As a what?
As a young man, you graduated from Rhodes.
I did graduate. Yeah, they gave me a piece of paper.
And now you are.
What'd you study at Rhodes?
The course of study I took was weird because the department they fused two subjects together. They're actually about to do this again. The theater department for many years has been a standalone department, and now it's about to become the theater and music department. When I was there, it was a fused department, but it was fused with the media department, which may have been the most perfect thing in the world for me and nobody else in the universe, because it let me take a lot of media theory and criticism, a lot of film history, a lot of things like that, but also take a lot of practical theater classes in stage direction, acting, and a lot of things like that. So I came out of school really screwed up and not knowing what I wanted to do. Maybe I wanted to be an actor. Maybe I wanted to be a director. I'd interned at Channel 3 News as a co-producer for the early morning show my last couple years in college, and had really already figured out that maybe I didn't want to do that, which was, that was sort of the thing I thought I wanted to do until I started doing it. So there was just a lot of time knocking around, getting jobs as an actor, jobs as a director, making jobs as an actor, making jobs as a director, waiting a lot of tables. I worked as a prep cook for a long time for Karen Carrier when she used to have automatic Slims and another roadside attraction before Bar DKDC and before the beauty shop.
Oh, cool.
I made ravioli, lots of stuff like that. Helped start a Shakespeare festival. I mean, it was just all over the place, doing a lot of theater as a director, as an actor, as a producer. And I got tired. I had this great revelation. And the revelation was that maybe I didn't want to do this theater thing professionally. Or at least I didn't want to do it the way it kind of works. Because, I'm not really a song and dance man. I like to do the dramas and the comedies and the classics, not so much the musicals, and that's where all the work is.
Right.
And you kind of have to work with what's available. And so maybe there's one show you sign on for on a contract of, 4 or 5 shows, and the rest of the things you're not all that interested in. And,
Right.
maybe one's the Christmas show, and it was written by the director, and the audience doesn't like it, and they throw pennies at you. Things like that really happen, and you could go, this show's the greatest show that's ever happened, and the very next show in the very same place with the very same audience.
Yeah.
It's so Charlotte, my wife, and I, we were doing a lot of work together. She was, also a performer, but she had the added benefit of being a really fantastic designer.
Right.
So was always able to pick up design work, and we did a lot of work together. And after working some gigs together that just, showed us that we liked doing the kind of theater we liked to do. We didn't just necessarily do it for the sake of doing it, just acting for the sake of acting or designing for the sake of designing. We wanted to have some control over our destinies, whatever that means. So we came back to Memphis, and I went back to working in restaurants, and she went back to designing and project managing. And I just eventually backed into a job at Contemporary Media. Started out as their marketing department when the entire marketing department was on maternity leave. Worked for a while as receptionist, sold classified advertising, and kept whispering in people's ears that I could write.
No, yeah.
So that was like a really long-winded answer to your question, because it's a good question. People don't know what I am, because I do all sorts of things and have done
right.
I've done weird jobs for, making viral commercials for the Ford Motor Company. It's just, it's difficult. But my main gig for a long time has been working with Contemporary Media, which does Memphis Magazine, the Memphis Flyer, Inside Memphis Business, Memphis Parent, other specialty magazines and books. And working for them as a writer. And, I guess the thing about having been a jack of all trades, having to do everything from, screen printing and advertising and waiting tables and cooking, is I'm sort of their jack of all trades. I write about everything.
Yeah.
Mostly theater and the performing arts. That's kind of the, that's my baseline. But it might be investigative reporting. It might be feature writing. It might be disaster coverage. It might be so I guess these days I describe myself as a writer with a few creative hobbies left.
Right.
Yeah. Can I stop talking now?
No, that's outstanding. I
usually interview
it.
people, so I don't always know how to be on this side of the
You're doing
table.
great.
Yeah?
You're doing fabulous.
Okay, we should
really
ask
good.
questions, because I feel like the longer I talk, the further I'm going off a cliff.
So what about Fly on the Wall?
Yes.
Fly on the Wall.
Yes.
God, I'm sad about this week's Fly on the Wall. This week's Fly on the Wall feels very phoned in.
For people who aren't aware, catch everyone up to Fly on the Wall.
So, Fly on the Wall. I didn't start Fly on the Wall. I was there at its birth. A dear friend of mine, and in fact the best man at my wedding, Jim Hannes, was a fellow traveler with me at Contemporary Media. We both sold classified ads together while we were whispering in people's ears, saying, "Hey, let us write a music review. Let us write a something." And eventually, people listened and liked our work together. Well, he was the first to get the call to go over and work full time in editorial, and they were doing a big redesign on the paper, and they were just looking around for crazy ideas. And everyone, like all of us, I was even brought in the meeting to sort of brainstorm and talk about stuff. And we were big fans of things like Spy Magazine and just stuff like that had that worked, that trucked in facts but presented them almost like monologue jokes or something like that. So Jim starts it, and the idea was to often do real media coverage or cover odds and ends in news that were real news, but to treat it cheekily and with an attitude and often a punchline. And he started it out, and he handed it off to Mark Jordan, who drums in my band, Papa Dop's West Coast Turnaround, who was also a little bit ahead of me in seniority. And Mark carried the torch for a short period of time. And then I took it over and have kind of grown it into the mess that it is today, which is both, I finally took it online. I describe, when people ask what it is, I say it was a blog before anyone knew what a blog was, because it was catch-all, it was personality-driven, it just collected things that wouldn't necessarily fit anywhere else. And so I don't know if that describes it or not, but I've been doing it for a lot of years. And when we took it online, we decided to expand the concept even a little bit further, to where it sometimes isn't just jokey, funny things. Sometimes it's like, hey, this is a cool thing you should know about, or this is a very Memphis thing, or we even do Onion style parodies from time to time. We looked around at like what other things that were really kind of successful that people liked on the net that sort of fit with Fly on the Wall's past mission, and if it fit, we said, well, we'll try a little bit of that.
Yeah, nice. That being said, my favorite is definitely the John Daly golden ratio.
Isn't that good?
Fibonacci.
Yeah,
the golden mean. Yes.
John Daly has shown up a lot in Fly on the Wall because he just does stuff. He's just one of those characters who, and it's always like when you're not expecting it, like just when you think John Daly's done. Something goes down, and you'll be like going, oh, I don't have anything at all for Fly on the Wall this week, and I'll just like randomly Google, I wonder what John Daly's up to, and something like you find people have been like turning pictures of him into Renaissance paintings, and you're like, oh look, here's John Daly as a Renaissance painting with a nude, and that's a real painting. I mean that's an actual shot. That's a picture. Of course it's a picture. What else would it be? But I mean it's an actual photograph from a golfing event. And there's the other one. There's the other John Daly that I used recently that
Oh,
where like there are all the pictures of President Trump that have been
right.
doctored, and he's golfing, and they put Trump's head on John Daly's body. And I don't know what they're really achieving there, because I think like if it had actually been a picture of Trump, it wouldn't look that different. And what's even sadder is the picture of John Daly. He's swinging a golf club and smoking a cigarette. So I mean, it's really, you're just defacing this kind of weird badass picture of John Daly by putting the president's face over the top of it.
That just triggered a memory. I attended an old money wedding in Birmingham, Alabama when I was in my 20s, and
Does it still spend?
It was a week. Does it still what?
How old is the money? I'm just trying. Because
Well,
that Confederate
that-
shit,
that-
they always said it was going to come back, but it won't buy you anything.
That's how it was just, to a Southern California kid, that's how it was described to me. So, but it was a week-long stay, and all these families hosted dinners and lunches and outings before the wedding on Saturday. It was this week-long event. And one of the large homes we visited, as you walked into the foyer, had a large painting of George Wallace reclining in the nude in a Greco-Roman thing eating
my God.
grapes. And I looked up, and of course, being from Southern California, I had no idea who George Wallace was, and the madam of the house was very proud of that painting.
I can only imagine. I would have been very proud of that painting. I'm a sucker for stuff like that. Like, so when eBay was new, I once woke up one morning really saying, "Oh my God, I hope I just lost that bid," because the last thing I had done before I had gone to bed the night before, this was like drinking and bidding was a thing back then. And I think I'd bid like $500 that I didn't have on a black velvet painting of Richard Nixon. And thank God somebody was drunker than I was.
I've had to tell Becky I accidentally bought a pink P base, and unfortunately I was able to sell it to a friend pretty quick.
I'm no great Richard Nixon fan, as you might suspect, but something about looking at it, I thought it would look really good on my wall next to my black velvet Willie Nelson and my black velvet Madonna and my black velvet Jesus and my black I mean, I've got all the black velvet, and I thought,
wow,
Nixon. And the nice thing is my black velvet Madonna actually looks like Selma Hayek, so it's like a twofer.
Have you seen the one on the other side of this wall?
I haven't been on the other side of that wall since they used to have like a big, like a poker table that looked like a ship's wheel in there.
Oh gosh,
So,
it's the Velvet Elvis on the other side of this wall. We're in Nate's bar right now up in Ernestine and Hazel's upstairs. It looks like Eric Estrada, Elvis. It's just,
those are the best ones. Like, it's probably a sacrilege, but the thing I like the best about my Jesus picture is that he's just as sockeyed as he can be. I mean, it's like one eye is normal and one eye like kind of bugs out of the side of his head. Like there was he needed to like make some mud and heal himself a little bit, because it's a bad painting, and it's not, and this is original. It's not like some old lady said that needs restoration. It didn't get messed up that way. This was it's beautiful. And my Willie Nelson, I should point out, in some ways is like the least. Whoever painted Willie Nelson was maybe not a gifted painter, but it doesn't have anything that you look at and go, "Oh, that's just insane."
Can you send us some pics before we publish this?
Do you want to see some pictures of my black velvet collection?
I would like to put it
take
in the
your
show
phone.
notes for sure.
Just take your phone and snap some pics. That would be.
I'll do it.
Stellar.
We keep all of the black velvet in the bathroom, and Elvis is like our patron saint of the John, because so many saints, like, they become the saints because of how they died in some way, the saint of this or the saint of that. So we have lots of Elvis in there. I have autographed pictures of Connery, and these are the things you look at when you sit on the throne.
Okay, so I know Jonathan's got some awesome notes. I'm kind of winging it here,
You
but
give me way too much credit.
At the top of our discussion, you mentioned that Memphis stuck to your shoe. I love that. That's a nice, poetic, visceral phrase there.
Somebody chewed some gum and spit it on the sidewalk.
So what is it about the Memphis arts, creative, political, just the Memphis scene that how would you describe to someone who's just popping in here brand new? What is Memphis?
Memphis just felt like a place that was dynamic. Like a lot of places, like Memphis isn't new, it's not a new city, it's an old city with a lot of history and like some huge world-changing history.
Right.
And we always think of it in terms of music, but also in terms of of business and all of these other things. We are a pop culture capital of the world. And I don't know that I've really fully understood that when I arrived. But by the time I graduated from college, I did know, and I knew it. I realized it while I was working as a tour guide at Graceland back when back when they had actual tour guides, and that was a job I took thinking it was going to be a joke. I was producing I was working as a producer. It was an intern. It was an internship level job, but I was co-producing the morning show for Channel 3, and it was like from 4 a.m. till 9 a.m. or something like that. And so I would get off at 9, and my classes that year were just on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were all day long, but just Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I went to the Channel 3 job every day, and then Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, I took this job as a tour guide at Graceland, and they were just really figuring it out. And it was the first time I started seeing the way other people see Memphis, people who aren't Memphians, people who came from Eastern Bloc countries and had sold their last cow to spend 2 weeks in Whitehaven. And, that's like a snarky, jokey way of saying something that's really true.
Right.
Just British fans who didn't really seem too touched in the head, who'd come back and propose to the same tour guide every year because they wanted to be a little closer to the king. And then lots of people who are just normal. And the celebrity, just all these people. And they just keep coming, and they keep coming. And you think at some point that's going to be the last tour bus. And it's not. And the people who think they are him and want to play pool on his table or do all of that, they're the crazies too. But most of it, it's just people, and they're not necessarily just Elvis fans. It was remarkable when we finally got Stax, when they rebuilt Stax and did all of these other things. This was there are places on the planet that for whatever reason acquire a kind of I think you start getting into really dangerous territory when you start talking about sacredness, but specialness, places that people feel like they need to get the idea, it's funny that Elvis, we think of him as being so kitschy, because the whole idea of kitsch begins with being able to travel easily, like when trains start making it possible for people who might have never gotten far past their neighborhood to suddenly go to the beach, and now they're able to bring back a shell and hear the ocean in the shell, or bring back a little thing full of sand and put it on the table and show it to their friends. Well, that also happened in the medieval times when you would have pilgrims who would travel to holy places and gather little pieces of the cross. Yeah. Well, music fans are the same way, and Elvis fans are even different than most music fans, because it's not necessarily just the music that spoke to them, but I've been doing Elvis Week stuff this week. Right. By the time this airs, it's going to be irrelevant. You asked me one question, and I totally told you I was going to do this when I was pretending to be a politician, answer the questions I wanted to answer. Yes. So I'm not going to talk about Elvis now. What got me here? We can talk about all that later. But there really was this moment working there that I saw the city differently. And I wasn't a fan at the time, and I wouldn't even really say that other than having just tremendous respect for the man and his music and what he did, I'm not a huge Elvis fan now. I mean, not to the degree that if I lived anywhere else, I'd know that I would be a person that would make that pilgrimage.
Right.
Although when people come here, I'm like, yeah, go do that. But that was the thing that first made me go, crap, okay? So then you have moments where you're going to see a band I don't know, the Bum Notes, or somebody you may have never heard of because they just existed in the 80s and 90s. One of these bands that was playing at the Overton Park Shell, which was not the Levitt Shell then, and it was not fine and fancy with big lights and a fantastic PA system. Well, it had a pretty good PA system, but it literally looked like it could crumble at any moment, and it was being kept propped up by a bunch of hippies who were dedicated to keeping it alive. Bunch of dirty hippie preservationists won't let us tear down anything for progress. I mean, really, these guys, just everybody, why can't we have progress in Memphis? Why can't we tear that crap down? So you would go there for maybe Earth Day, and you sit down and you're like watching these bands and they're good. And then like somebody comes and says, "Can I sit down beside you?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." And it's like Rufus Thomas, you know, and he's like just sitting there taking it in with you. And then later on, you get to see him perform, and you know, you find yourself, you know, standing in line and at Walgreens to get your film developed. Remember when you used to go get your film developed?
Oh gosh.
And like there's a guy in front of you and he's got a little African hat on and you start talking to him and it's Ernest Withers, you know, the great civil rights photographer. And then you realize, you know, I was working at Squash Blossom Market and every day Alex Chilton would come in to get his beans and rice and steamed vegetables and everyone would just like, "Oh my God, it's Alex Chilton." And I didn't know who Alex Chilton was. I mean, I kind of knew who the box tops were at the time. I mean, I got educated real fast, but I was always kind of a little bit jerky to him, and for whatever reason, actually,
big star.
He was, you know, he wound up, you know, I wouldn't exactly say we were ever friends or had a relationship, but it was an we would sit together and converse in bars almost about anything other than music, you know, after that, because we'd gotten to know each other in this one context. And it wasn't until like really considerably later that I started realizing that this access to these people and this culture in this place was, you know, not like anywhere else anywhere else I'd ever been. You know, on one hand, it was an old city and full of all these stars and people who had, well, you know, stars and legends and people who'd really contributed to culture, and they were just there and they were accessible. And if you didn't just fawn all over them, they might talk to you in a bar. And
yeah.
And even though it had all of this, it also seemed kind of jumbled and disconnected and not fully formed. You know, you go to a place like San Francisco or New York or, you know, Chicago, and those places seem like, you know, they're just kind of, you know, there's a way that things happen. This place,
dialed in.
Like yeah. You know, I mean, so much of Memphis was bombed out back then. You know, downtown was empty. Mm-hmm. And especially, you know, after 5 o'clock, there was nothing doing down here practically. There were a couple of places. You know, Automatic Slims eventually opens up, and there was a place over on the river. My mouth is so dry from biking down here on the Yellow Water. Well, there were just, you know, there were a few places, but it just not like it is now. So it felt like a place that was forming, where, you know, on one hand you could be connected to all of this history, and on the other hand, you know, you felt like you could also maybe become a part of it in ways that it didn't seem accessible in these other places. I should also point out, like, I think everybody has a lot of luck and happenstance in their lives, and I made a really good friend in college who later became a roommate, like a summertime roommate when we were all shacking up in cheap college-rented apartments. Her name was Augusta Palmer, and her dad was Robert Palmer, who was the New York Times' first official pop music writer.
Wow.
And you know, they're all from this area, and he played with the he'd been with the Insect Trust. He'd also played with a local group here called The Scam, and he was back relocated here. So through them, I got an opportunity to meet just a whole lot of musicians, and also got this real unexpected education that I wasn't looking for. I was open to it as a music fan and had always been a music fan, but had maybe not known where to look. Well, all of a sudden, I had all these people. I couldn't have a conversation with them about the weather or a dog walking down the street or just whatever. Just everything always turned to music.
Yeah.
And these weren't just people who were fans or had knowledge. They were often people who had participated in some ways. You know, one of the biggest supporters of the Tennessee Shakespeare Festival when we were doing the Tennessee Shakespeare Festival was Lee Baker from Mudboy and the Neutrons. And one of the big fundraisers that we had for that now defunct organization, may it forever rest in peace, was a very nice 3 years of my life. We used to perform in the old Tennessee Brewery when it was gutted out.
Wow.
And we did a big fundraiser in the interior of there, where all the stairs used to be that went all the way up. And we had painted the back wall white like a movie screen, and Professor Elixir's Southern Troubadours, who were this big train wreck, glorious train wreck of a band that played like a fusion of bluegrass and jug band. I always called them kind of garage jug grass. I never knew what to call them.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they played, and then Mudboy and the Neutrons were the featured act, and films of like old Errol Flynn dogfight movies, and D.W. Griffith's Intolerance was like projected over them playing. Just, one of those magic nights. Sybil Shepherd used to live down here, and she came like to complain about the music, and then saw what was going on. I was like, oh, can I come in my pajamas and my stuff? Memphis was just a place where you couldn't. You didn't know if you were going to, bump into Joe Strummer on a deserted South Main corner from back when they were doing Mystery Train. You didn't know. It just seemed like a place where anything could happen, and it was, I don't know. It was just as a young man, it became very magic to me. It was very fascinating to me. I couldn't get a good job to save my life. Was just always, just on the verge of a complete financial ruin and never being able to get back up again. But I couldn't get it out of my system.
Speaking of Sybil Shepherd, the Jack Robinson,
the Jack Robinson Gallery.
I had no idea. I just played a couple gigs,
I photographed everybody.
Private gigs, stunning. Just and his story. I guess he was Mississippi, and then went to New York, and all of a sudden got into all the right crowds. Warren Beatty and the whole underground New York scene,
right?
Rolling Stone, all of it in the 70s, up until 80s.
And then came back.
Came back. He got sick, or he came back to help his parents. There's a biography there. And pretty much all of a sudden photography was just kind of like, he got into stained glass.
Well,
it's stunning. Yeah. And then, died in 97 after he got sick. And then, but yeah, if you're coming to Memphis, you got to check out the Jack Robinson. It's just stunning.
It's really cool. And what you're just describing about going to New York and getting involved in all of that, back then, downtown was alive and it was happening, but it was also empty. It was a lot like what I was describing. I was saying, it was still Manhattan, so it wasn't a lot like downtown Memphis. But, when we think of that New York scene that was happening in the 70s, it was only a few hundred people, really. It wasn't like, Manhattan the way we think of it now. So if you went and were a part of that world, you could become a part of that world. And so many of those people I was talking about, all the
the Palmer,
Bob Palmer, Randall Lyons, who appears like all over Robert Gordon's It Came from Memphis, and in William Eggleston's film Stranded in Canton. You see a lot of Randall Lyons in that. I think he and Sam Shepard were roommates for a while. I mean, they will always talk about, the being in New York for that time. And I always understood that the Memphis guys may have been a little bit weird for the New Yorkers. That it always seemed like just when they were getting pretty far out there, we could match them. Jimmy Crossway, did Dream Circuses, and I'm off track now. You probably
Sorry.
Hit it, John. Nothing.
It's funny you're talking about having that sense that Memphis was forming in the time you were talking about.
It was both formed and forming.
I still get that sense. I say still. I'm not really qualified to say still, but I mean I get that sense. Like there is something forming here, and you're not the first person I've heard say. That.
It's a stutter. And, I think that it was that, what happens is you get all this good momentum going in one direction and then something happens. There's a big economic collapse, or, something shuts down the money that was going here or going there. So, we've had a few of those since this time I was talking about. So I think there have been like several times. And, but then again, I guess cities are always, some have like a constant identity, but others are constantly reshaping.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm coming from. Like you mentioned.
Figuring out what they are.
Yeah, exactly. There are some that are constant, and then.
Okay, so this is maybe getting kind of theoretical and philosophical, but I think you're qualified to have this question thrown at. So politics.
The answer is fart.
Right. The political machine of Memphis, the civil rights machine, the arts, how all this converges. What is it that you wish?
What needs to change, and do you see it happening?
No, man,
Go.
because what you described earlier was like, it was just magical, just lovely. You know, this kind of while working at Graceland, you had this awareness happen of like, you know, this thing of people coming to Memphis and actually letting you know that Memphis is unique, that Memphis is not just.
You know, I don't know that I always knew that I was a writer or that I was going to be a writer. I always had this sense that I might do that someday. I think the idea, I'm coming around to answer your question. I'm not going to go off. I'm not going in a totally different direction.
Did I form a question? I feel like I trailed off.
I think you got there.
Yeah, all right.
So I started realizing that I started understanding things best when I was able to see how other people saw them.
Right.
You know, when I was able to have my own bubbles of what I believed to be burst in some way by exposure to really often seeing paradoxes between how different people saw things, like, you know, going and having heard people talk about, you know, Memphis sucks this, Memphis sucks that, and then going to Graceland and seeing these people that just, they didn't want to go home. And, you know, maybe for reasons that aren't rational, but you know, not always. And you know, I certainly had fallen in love with the town. Now I'm off topic. Okay. So I'm going to give you a roundabout answer to that question. When I moved to Uptown, which used to be called Greenlaw when I moved there, which is just north of downtown Memphis, it's the oldest streetcar suburb in the city, and it was very down at heel at the time. When I moved to Memphis, or when I moved into downtown and started living in the South Main area in a kind of also down at heel part of what was then down at heel, it's now very nice, on South Front, where they store all the old used cars. That was living quarters then. I lived up in the front of that. And people would say, "You're an urban pioneer. You're an urban pioneer."
Urban pioneer.
And at the time, I was like, I'm an urban pioneer. I didn't know what that meant. I really didn't know what that meant. I'm like Daniel Boone in Skechers. But at the time, nobody else lived down here, really. I mean, it was like us and some hobos. And I mean, seriously, Sybil Shepherd lived around the corner behind a wall. You know, there were people that lived behind a wall down here, but everybody else that lived down here, it was just like, you know, it was empty, and the empty fields, people just dumped equipment there that was full of rust. And so when people said that, I got it. I was like, oh, I'm an urban pioneer. Well, then I moved to Greenlaw, and people kept saying it, even though Greenlaw was very settled. It was full of people, and there was more life in one square block of Greenlaw than any place I'd ever lived in the 901. And people kept saying, "This is my friend Chris. He lives in Greenlaw. He's an urban pioneer." And I was like, I can't be a pioneer in a place that's settled. And it occurred to me that these people who were saying that, who were all really good people, who like were big-hearted people and open-minded people, often people with very liberal values, these were people that they couldn't see. These people were invisible to them. This was a culture that was invisible to them because they were very poor people. They are literally the invisible people that if you don't live in that neighborhood, there's no reason for you to go there because there's no business there, there's no industry there, the major thoroughfares don't drive you through there, the interstate takes you over there. It was very disinvested at this point. And so you start realizing that, you know, even we talk about flyover country in the big sense, but there's a macro and a micro to flyover country, and that exists in your cities too. And there are all these neighborhoods that are very settled and very full of people, and they're very good people, and they're very family-oriented people. But if you watch the TV news at night, you would think that outside of Germantown and outside of Midtown and outside of the sort of you know, trendy areas where there's a lot of activity, it's nothing but a bunch of, you know, it's the wild, wild west, or it's empty, or there's a word you hear a lot that's blight. And there are a lot of reasons for blight, and those reasons almost never have anything to do with the people. Once you start learning the history of zoning and the history of who could and couldn't get bank loans and all of these things, you start realizing that the reasons for blight aren't the reasons we've all been told. And so when you talk about solving the political problems, I would say the first thing that needs to happen is that a lot of people need to get beyond their perspectives and really have their illusions broken as to what they believe or what they think about the place that they live in and the people that they live with. And there's a real idea, and there's a real thing, and it's hard for people to talk about. And the technical term is fragility. And it means that when we start talking about these things, like if I start talking about, the disinvestment in these, about how, it's not the poor people that lived in these areas that are responsible for it falling down. It's, whatever. Well, instead of like having that conversation, if we get defensive and we're like, well, I give to whatever charity and I judge people on a person by person basis. This defensiveness, these are our points of fragility. And it's where we stop listening and we stop exploring because we somehow believe we are being blamed for a thing. And you want to know the only thing at this point in time that we really need to blame people for is that. Is not like by going, okay, you have a perspective that's very different from what I've experienced. And we really need to hear it and we really need to listen to it. And we need to stop being fragile and defensive and have very open conversations between, people who are white, people who are black, people who are rich, people who are poor, people who are disenfranchised in a lot of different ways. And to understand that, in America, we've had a very bad idea that being poor is some kind of moral failing. That if you haven't succeeded, this is some reflection of who you are as a moral person. We equate success with, virtue.
That's also considered a spiritual failure by many denominations.
It's really frustrating because, I feel like Memphis opened my eyes to a lot of things, to good music, to good people, but also a good way of listening and understanding. And really, Memphis opened me up to understanding that there's no substitute for experience. That I may have read a lot, I may know a lot, I may think I'm a smart guy with a big heart and an open mind and have all the answers. But if I just start applying that in some kind of vacuum, I'm actually going to screw more stuff up trying to do all the right things. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think I think that real dialogues have to begin, and that begins with really wanting to. And I think historically, a lot of people just haven't wanted to have these conversations. They haven't wanted to, get beyond their defensiveness and say, "Hey, not my fault, man." And as long as that's our attitude, it is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was beautifully put.
I want to ask you okay, let me back this up. Being born and raised in Southern California, that's
you said that a few times.
That's an entire right.
So you still experiencing culture
too,
shock.
I mean,
yeah.
Moving to St. Louis.
What are you trying to say, Carl?
Well, moving to St. Louis was interesting, and I had thought I had moved to the Bible Belt, moving from Southern California to St. Louis.
Negative.
Yes, that is. Yeah, major negatory. No, moving to Memphis, I was very naive and thinking, well, this is pretty much like St. Louis. And someone had asked me, so what do you think of Memphis? I'd been here about a year. And my go-to joke was, it needs a ton more Roman Catholics to kind of balance out
the Protestantism. Did I tell you I was from a town that calls St. Patrick's Day Irish Day because it's that Protestant? I understand. I understand.
So
they just it was dry. It was dry until 2 years ago. They just got a liquor store, and I regret that I've not been to the Irish Day celebration since the first liquor store in Erin. And the wee bit of Ireland and Tennessee had no liquor store.
So what's your take on the spiritual climate of Memphis? Like, how does that inform and shape things? And
I'm such a
You're trying to gain listeners.
We could be.
I'm kidding.
In the city with more churches and gas stations, it may be the conversation you want to have. And, a lot of cities make that claim, and probably a lot of cities do. I don't know. I just said it out loud, and I hate when I repeat cliches that I don't know if they're actually true or not. But we got a lot of damn churches.
Sure.
I probably shouldn't say damn churches. You got a lot out. All right. But I'm actually such a complete heathen. I sometimes feel I feel like I'm not in a place where I can properly assess that.
Well, but look, we've only hung out a little bit. Our wives have hung out far more.
Yeah.
But in getting
because we're lone wolves.
Right. Okay. All right. So I would say. So would you consider yourself agnostic? Atheist or something, it's hard to put a label.
I don't have a word. But, I'm not a thing.
But
here's what I think. I think that there is a bad idea that used to circulate out there about if this life is the only thing there is, then nothing really matters. And I was sort of like, if this life is the only thing there is, then what we do is the only thing that matters. That's sort of my way of expressing my spirituality. Okay. It's like,
how about the word transcendence? Because of arts, because of things that click and make your soul. So there's a systematized transcendence, maybe by the religious machine, the dominant religious machine of this area, so to speak. But as human beings, because of arts, because there are the arts, like we're just not. We go beyond just sleeping, eating, sex machines. Like we have this.
Sometimes we like to dance.
Yes, right.
But that's just
So I'm saying so I just love. I mean, everything you've said so far has been golden, I think. Anyway, so your perspective of like this thing that is Memphis, this large. Someone, as what I was trying to get to the point of my story, that someone said, "Oh no, you have arrived at the Bible Belt buckle." In this area, which I was naive and I was kind of blindsided.
I'm heartbroken that there's not going to be a Memphis Music and Heritage Festival on Mid-America Mall this year. It just absolutely cracks my heart in two. I'm not completely surprised that it's not happening, but I'm nevertheless sad because that's been a place where I've seen some amazing things. But one of the most beautiful things I saw ever was when my twins were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. They were beyond being toddlers, but they were maybe not in school yet or had just started kindergarten. And we, as a family, and by that point they knew that they were being raised different because, I guess they must have been at least in kindergarten or first grade because they had already had brushes with people who assumed that if you didn't, if you weren't churchy, that must mean you're, worshiping Satan. And of course, I'm like, tell them yes. I'm like, say yes, and I would give them evil sounding things to say and be bad because I just sort of feel like you should fight ignorance with by preying on it. That's not true. I'm being mean. Well, actually, it is true. I did tell them to say all sorts of horrible things.
Fight ignorance by saying ignorant things.
But they knew better. They were like, Dad, that's just going to get us in bigger trouble. So they didn't do any of that. But, they were aware that they were different than most people in a city that's very, very religious. And that we were watching gospel music. And there were these great, there were quartets and just different groups. And it was just great Memphis Southern black gospel. And it was just deep and rich and beautiful, and my Lou, who is somehow took to heathenism faster than anyone I've ever seen, and is today is she's at the head of the class. Yay, Lou. Lou's hands raise up in the air, and Lou just comes out of the seat and starts just dancing around in in this very in this way that you see all the time in churches when, people get happy or catch the Holy Ghost or however you want to say it. It's not as completely out of body as that. It's somewhere between that and like a good garage rock show, right?
Right.
And that's for me the thing that's great, because like I always told the kids that, I may not buy into the metaphysics, but there is something really beautiful about the idea of transcendence, and also about the way we come together a lot of times through music and through song in these transcendent moments, or through other kinds of art in these transcendent moments, which are often, which can be one part pedantic learning experience and another part completely out of body experience, wordless. You catch a lesson without the language defining it too much for you. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but I do think that for all the strife and frustration that can exist as different ways of believing come into contact with each other, there is a beautiful thing about it. And it's a thing that you don't actually have to buy into the metaphysics of it to experience or participate in.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess I'm a leech, because I tell people that that's part of, what I feel is an empowering thing about Memphis. I think probably since the first time I saw maybe Orlando Draper's choir.
Really? You saw? Man, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
When he was still living.
Alive. Yeah. I mean, when I had arrived in St. Louis in the early '90s, I hooked up with a black gospel choir from Washington University, and he had just hit the scene. We did his arrangement of the Gaithers' "He Touched Me."
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I won't be able to call any of the players' names right, but my friend Shelby Bryant, who used to play in a great kind of garage new wave band called the Clears back in the 90s, and then went on to do some solo projects like a thing called Cloud Wow Music. Really just an eccentric and wonderful soul. Would often invite me to different churches around town to hear, just different keyboard players.
Oh, wow.
We'd go somewhere off Elvis Presley and stop and get fresh off the assembly line Krispy Kreme donuts, and then go listen to, maybe some organ player that Herbie Hancock was into, or, because musicians listen to musicians. And that's the other thing, is that I just feel like the depth of music knowledge, music love, audiophilia, all that stuff in Memphis is, people are fans in other places. And in Memphis, it's different. If you start saying a little something about music, people will call you on it. And if you don't, they'll let you know really fast.
Right.
I very briefly was the music editor at the Memphis Flyer. It was never supposed to be a permanent thing. It was, like I said, I've done everything for a minute over there. And there was a time when they had hired Chris Harrington to take the job, but he wasn't going to be able to start. Mark Jordan had left, Chris Harrington was starting, and I was filling in the gap. And I was putting together a bunch of stuff, working on a tight deadline, doing all my regular stuff, and putting together the music stuff. And oh my goodness, what was it? It was Billy Lee Riley. I was writing about Billy Lee Riley, and just typing out his name, I typed out Billy C. Riley. I guess I was thinking like Jeannie C. Riley, the country singer who did Harper Valley PTA.
Oh, wow.
I somehow fused those names in my brain. Well, you could write stories about people starving in the street, about the Russians coming to take over. You could write all these stories about terrible things happening and people just ignore it, not say a peep. You get Billy Lee Riley's name wrong, and people will call and say they want to punch you in the nose. I mean, people just take it really seriously here. And while it can be a real pain when you're like the guy who just got it wrong, if you are not somebody that's defensive and like listen to Memphis will teach you. It's just, it's just this vast repository. And, increasingly we're losing a lot of the people who you can say it can teach you from people who you can say, these were life lessons learned.
Oh, yeah.
So many of the folks who came through. I mean, there was a time when, like I said, you'd be standing in line at Walgreens and talking to somebody and they go, oh, yeah, I was on such and such and such and such at Stax. And you're thinking, no, you weren't. And of course they were. Because so many people at different times did this or did that. It's just a city where it's also connected, and it's so connected to greatness. And I feel like I'm rambling again.
No, it's good. No. We're just. I'm just asking you to testify to that which is unique of what is Memphis. Jonathan, you have something? He's getting up. He's got a. Should we take a break? Let's take a break. All right. Well, hey, we're back. We're tracking now.
Okay.
Just want to let you know in case you say something.
We were talking about C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis.
Ursula K. Le Guin.
Look at that.
And Ursula K. Le Guin.
Hey, two things I know we just took a short break. We went downstairs. We're back up at Nate's Bar up in Ernestine Hazel's. Big shout out to Ernestine Hazel's again. And thank you for letting us
Thank you so much.
use your facilities. Okay, Memphis Theater. So, David Foster.
What about David Foster? Rest his soul.
Right? Yeah. So Memphis Theater is a unique gem. I know St. Louis has a tightly held, beloved theater scene as well. Memphis reminds me of the people that have a tenacious love and defend and continue to support and further the theater scene.
Yeah.
So being still, I've been here 6 years, but I'd never seen.
Hey,
Well,
we're downtown at Ernestine Hazel's. That was some real live honking going on.
So my first exposure to David Foster was Peter and the Starcatchers.
Oh, right. And he,
delight,
he was Captain Blackstash.
Good gosh. And I remember seeing, I'm like, who is that? And then getting to see him, Priscilla,
Queen of the Desert.
Just
And
phenomenal. Just phenomenal,
he
dude.
could turn around, and he didn't do it often enough. You had to practically drag him, it seemed, to get him to do dramatic performances, non-musical performances. But when he would do that, he was every bit as adept as doing musical performances. I guess we should probably go ahead and say that he's a performer who passed away very recently after a bout with cancer, because
right.
we're talking about him in the past tense without
right.
establishing that, and that can be weird sometimes.
Right.
And this has been a year where Memphis has lost a bunch of really beloved figures, and David wasn't really the even the first in this set of terrible dominoes that have fallen. Man, I'm not even going to be able to list them all right now off the top of my head, but David, my first encounter with him, I was doing a production of Sam Shepard's Alive the Mind at Theater Memphis, and was playing Jake, one of his kind of hyper masculine, overly violent, just characters, and who is in for a change. Mm-hmm. And the director Kevin Jones had this play is always associated with music. It was originally performed with a bluegrass. Live with a bluegrass band, and I'm completely the Red Clay Ramblers.
Oh wow!
The Red Clay Ramblers. It was taking me a minute to remember who it was. I knew it was actually kind of a big deal band. They played live when it originally debuted in New York, and this director heard it differently. He heard it with gospel songs, and he got David Foster and Carla McDonald, who's also a big local musical theater performer here, to stand in the catwalks and sing gospel music. To underscore the scenes and to take us in and out of different scenes. And this was my first encounter with David. And the two of them made such beautiful sounds together in the rafters of Theater Memphis. It never occurred to me that they might do anything other than sing or even sing together. It was really just,
wow.
I mean, probably a cliche to say heavenly, but it just was. And so it was... just a joy to like discover that he could do so much more, and was really just one of those people when you thought you knew the range of his talents, he would turn around and surprise you. And I think you're right in describing Memphis as a unique theater town. A lot of places have more theater, a lot of places have more professional theaters, but this place manages to do an incredible amount of really, I think, pretty high level work. And some of that is because we have access to facilities that a lot of places have. I mean, I think that, a lot of great stuff happens in Nashville, but they don't have anywhere near the number of facilities that we have for people to do things. When Playhouse on the Square was, the original Theater Works was down here on South Main. I don't know if you know that or not.
No,
it was at South Main in Hewling, where the Village Art Gallery is. The Art Village Gallery is now. Ephraim's, where he started an art gallery. That was the original Theater Works building. And then they built a new one in Overton Square. And then that was created specifically to have a place where new emerging artists could fail without breaking the bank. They could like rent a place that would have some decent lighting, some infrastructure. Back then it wasn't that much, but now the new facility is got some pretty nice things in it. And all of these little independent companies that might normally have to rent shop fronts or perform in living rooms with no technical facilities, no technical amenities, or rent whatever they had, whatever they had budget for. They're able to rent, Theater Works, or rent Evergreen, or or maybe even some of them are resident companies that are in these places and perform there all the time. So you get like a lot of little companies that over time start producing very finished work. And you also have a lot of companies that work very lean with very little that also do very good work. I don't know if this is, the theater community also, I think, is it's very loyal, and when you start thinking of it, I guess it's pretty large, but I don't always know how much of an overlap there is between different communities, between the visual arts community and the Memphis music community and the Memphis theater community.
Right.
So maybe there's like specific things you want to ask, because if you just let me ramble about theater.
We should also mention that Chris writes a blog, Intermission Impossible.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Intermission Impossible. And it's news, it's reviews, it's me being cranky. It's just, it's I like to know what's going on in the local theater community and let other people know. And I guess that's what blogs are.
So how much acting do you get to do?
I don't do a whole lot anymore. Like I said, I kind of just had this change where what I thought was the thing that was for me, it just didn't feel like it was right anymore. Every now and then I'll go back and I'll do a little something. I guess maybe the last thing I acted in was a really acclaimed and award-winning anniversary production of The Robber Bridegroom at Rhodes College. It was so full of so many good people and a good director, and it was just a joy to go back to the womb, to the theater I came out of, and help them celebrate the 30th anniversary of the McCoy Theater with that show. But it was, it almost takes something of that magnitude to get me back under the lights. I'm more likely to direct. I went away, it's actually been a couple of years, because when you work as I'm a full-time, I am blessed to be employed as a full-time writer. Right. Not many people get to say that anymore with, those opportunities shrinking. So to make theater takes time, and it's a real commitment. And so it's just really hard to do it a lot. And I went to Middle Tennessee and directed a production of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure that I just really had a blast doing. It's one of those things that, like, when you're doing it, you're like, oh my God, I should do this all the time. I forgot, how much, it's like duck to water. This is exciting. And then you finish it and it closes and everybody hugs necks and the actors go back to New York or wherever their next job is. And and you go home and you're still riding high, and then you get back and you're back at the job, and you just acclimate to it, and that. And I also love what I do here, so it's not like I'm sitting there the whole time going, "Why am I not directing? Why am I not?" And the other thing is that whatever thrill I used to get from performing on stage, I'm able to supplant that a little bit just by doing a band, and it's just me and my buddies who were more or less a drinking club with a little country music problem.
Papa Tops,
West Coast turnaround.
Right.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Hey, welcome to Nate's. Hey, we just had someone popping in. That's cool. So now this endeavor is. I think that was the first time I actually met you. Was through your band.
Yeah, it was.
It was, and you gave me a CD, and it's in my car. And I was listening to. I found it on YouTube. The
something we can all identify
Daddy drinks
with.
because you cry. That's and anyone who's raised children.
It's my free bird.
Okay, but tell us about Papa. Tell us about the Papa Tops.
Well, it's it's old school throwback honky tonk music, guitars, pedal steels,
Baritone guitar.
sometimes.
I love the baritone work in that. Yeah,
John Whittemore, who plays steel, also usually brings his baritone guitar.
That's a great
It comes
sound.
out on most of the trucking songs, and the stuff where you want a little extra thump down there.
I love it.
And it's just a bunch of old punks and garage rockers sumtime back in the mid-90s all realized we were sort of secret fans of old-time country music. John Stivers, who played guitar or plays guitar, they actually have a new record coming out for Impala, local surf. They're described as a surf band. It's sort of like how I said Professor Elixir was hard to describe because they weren't bluegrass, but they weren't a jug band, but they weren't not. Impala isn't really a surf band, but they're the best surf band you've ever heard. But a lot of what they do might be better described as crime jazz. Or drag strip music, or
crime jazz.
Well, think about like all those old like 70s detective TV shows like Barnaby Jones and all those Quinn Martin productions, or the old 67 Spider-Man soundtrack. Or think about Henry Mancini's Experiment in Terror.
Oh gosh,
They do this amazing Experiment in Terror that George Clooney became a huge fan of. So when he did the movie about the original Gong Show host Chuck Barris, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind.
What a great movie.
There's a scene in there where they use the entire version of Impala's Experiment in Terror, and it's just perfect.
Wow.
So he and I were getting loaded at the P&H Cafe one night, and basically just whining. We weren't crying in our beers, but we were whining in our beers. There's no good country music you can go listen to. And then shortly after that, I was at the Mid-South Fair, and George Jones was playing a free concert at the Mid-South Fair. And I bumped into John Whittemore, who I'd gone to college with, and he'd played in a punk band called Neighborhood Texture Jam. And, as long as I'd known John Whittemore, I had not really known. And he had also played, he was playing a little pedal steel now and then with Professor Elixir. So like I said, were they a country band? Were they a bluegrass band? Were they a jug band? I don't know. It's a mystery. But I knew he played pedal steel, and now here he is at a George Jones concert, and I started thinking, all right, there's a thing that's going to happen. So I just started calling people, and next thing I knew, we were a country band, and it seemed at the time like we might just put on fake nudie suits once or twice and do some gag sets for our friends, and then we just kept getting gigs, and people kept asking us to play. And like 20 years, or I don't even know how many years later. We don't count.
Yeah.
A couple of times a month. We'd be a whole lot better if we'd ever practiced, but a couple of times a month, like some bar wants us to play, and so we show up and we do some of our songs. We do a little smattering of a lot of stuff. Most people might not even recognize as country music anymore because it just doesn't sound like.
Okay.
It just doesn't sound like what you hear on the radio.
Well,
it's all, George Jones, Buck Owens, Waylon Jennings.
Yeah, but there's been
Merle Haggard
there's been a
country.
resurgence of that, what you would call They called it alt country for a minute, right? Alternative
I think
country.
Dale Watson, who now has a house in Memphis, calls it Ameripolitan.
Wow.
Ameripolitan, because he realized that what's now called country music doesn't sound anything like the country music that he grew up or that informed his sound.
Right.
So he thought there needed to be a different name for it, and it maybe gets at it.
Yeah.
Honky tonk, and the politan in it. You're like, well, isn't country music country from the country? And honky tonk in particular is post World War II music. It's a city sound. It's like when all the soldiers came back from World War II, they may have grown up on the farm, but they went to the city looking for jobs and opportunities. And so it was this electric sound for the first time, as they needed amps to play in noisy bars. And instead of really being about life on the farm, maybe it's more about displacement, and there's a lot of loss. Well, there's a lot of death in the old country music, but there's a different kind of loss in honky tonk.
Okay, answer this for me, because I just started playing with Gary Hardy down on the Johnny Cash tribute show that he does.
Okay.
At Alfred's on Beale, Thursday nights.
6 to 9.
But and I have always been peripheral to that Americana politan type music. Yeah, but what is up with everyone killing their girlfriends and fiancés in these songs? Like
the murder ballad?
Yeah, oh my gosh! What is up with that?
It's a good question, and I think there's never a bad time to consider or reconsider the meaning of things, and so I think there's a lot of things that are going on in the murder ballad, and I think maybe we need to think about it and question the value of them going forward. I love them, and I realize that it is maybe a problematic love sometimes. But so let's think about it through the lens of maybe one song. Well, first of all, I'll say that there's a lot of functions. I think they can be everything from a warning, act right, or you're going to get what's coming to you. I mean, I think that's like I think there are ways that they sometimes carry some bad baggage of our culture along with them.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure.
But I think at some level they also maybe function like horror movies. Like they're maybe also part of the mating ritual. Let's tell stories that make us very scared, and then we'll jump in each other's arms. I think there's some of that going on. But also a lot of it's just like people have. So Shakespeare's got this line in The Tempest where all these clown characters who've been shipwrecked come across Caliban, who's part man and part fish, and they're trying to figure out what he is. And they just know that they're going to take him back with them on the ship because they're going to get rich. And the line is, where people will not pay out a shilling to relieve a lame beggar, or will not give a droit to relieve a lame beggar, they'll give 10 to see a dead Indian or something like that. There's this fascination with things that are sensational or fantastic. The same way we talk about in modern media, if it bleeds, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
Well, this isn't newly true. This was true 100 years ago. This was true, 300 years ago. And probably one of the most notorious ones is Knoxville Girl. Do you know the song Knoxville Girl?
Yeah.
The Louvin Brothers probably have the most iconic version of it. I knew a little girl in Knoxville, a town we all know well, and every Sunday evening out in her home I dwell. It goes on. It's the story. It's the story of a man who invites his girlfriend out on an evening walk, and as they walk along, he picks a stick up off the ground and starts hitting her in the head with it.
Gosh.
And, yeah, she fell down on her bended knee. For mercy, she did cry. She said, "Billy, dear, don't kill me here. I'm unprepared to die." She never spoken, I can't remember. She never spoke another word. I only beat her more until the blood around her with her blood did flow. I mean, I took her by her golden curls and drug her round and round. I threw her in the river that flows through Knoxville town. It's brutal. And a lot of people have said it's made even more brutal by the fact that it's hard to like figure out exactly what his motivations are. That's not true. A good close reading of that song, every piece of the puzzle is there. And the more you start picking it apart and realizing what's happening in that story, the more brutal it becomes. Rather than like understanding, making it like, oh, well, that's much better now. No, it's actually way worse.
Wow.
So that song was a hit for the Louvin brothers in the 50s. That song was originally recorded, and I'm terrible with dates, but I think originally recorded. It was not recorded. There was no recording instruments. The original version of that song was maybe called The Bloody Miller, or something like that.
No,
it was like in the 1600s, or maybe even earlier than the 1600s, and it was like the Bloody Miller, the Bloody this other thing. It then became like Bickford Girl or Shropshire Girl. It had other names, maybe even Oxford Girl. It was all these different names before it finally made the hop across the pond, lived in Appalachian folk balladry. It's very well documented. You can like trace the history of Knoxville Girl, and it's fascinating.
Wow.
And so what you have is like this oral tradition through song of a story that was like, every community has either urban legends or even news stories about some famous murder. We talk about Charles Manson, or we talk about different serial killers. You can't turn on a History Channel without seeing like some show about,
or a Netflix original.
About some, psychopathic killer. We're just fascinated by this. And then again, the nightly news. It's all gunshots, it's all blood, it's all whatever. Well, so a long time ago, this Miller kills his girlfriend, and it's really bloody, and it's really sensational, and everybody in the town talks about it, and they keep talking about it, and it's passed down the way we pass down the same kinds of stories, only this gets turned into a song. And so it managed to, last from then until now just by people retelling it the same way we tell the stories, the urban legends about the guy who goes, about the couple at Lover's Lane who, find the hook stuck in their car door, drove away just before the hook killer, got a hold of them. The difference being they actually have traced the provenance, and this murder actually happened.
Oh gosh! As a youth, I got into my dad's record collection. And my first murder ballad would have been the Kingston Trio, Tom Dooley, "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley." He tells the story of like, I killed my girl.
Yeah,
Now I'm
going
to go hang. I remember as a kid thinking in contrast to listening to Neil Diamond and Beach Boys, and it was quite the contrast to what's this? And then the 90s, Richard Marx, kind of like a soft murder ballad, Hazard, his song about he's accused of killing his girlfriend, but he says he didn't. But maybe he did. But he says he didn't.
I think there's a lot of soft and maybe not so soft misogyny in a lot of it. But then there's just a lot of we're attracted to fantastic and sensational stories like horror movies, like the movies, like I said, the ghost stories we tell around campfires. We don't make those stories up off the top of our heads. They're stories that somebody told us that we heard somewhere else before, and someone heard it before them, and most of them are nonsense. But some of them are rooted in real things, and I think that the broader attraction is that. But inside that broad attraction, there are maybe some really problematic elements. And I understand that that's true, and yet one of my favorite songs to sing is Johnny Paycheck's "Pardon Me, I've Got Someone to Kill," the most polite of all murder ballads. By the time you tell the sheriff it'll all be over, he'll find us in the big house on the hill. He'll find the note explaining why I killed us all. Pardon me, I've got someone to kill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Johnny Paycheck, bless his heart. Really a great, an underrated singer, Paycheck. If you've never listened to the recordings he made on a label called Little Darlin', Don't listen to like the big label production stuff. Most of that stuff's overproduced. Well, some of it's good. I'm not going to trash it all, but the little darling singles are something special.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when's the next time?
There's my advert. There's a little plug for Johnny Paycheck.
Please, yeah. But
better known as Donnie Young, a hot-headed, temperamental cuss who dishonorably discharged from the Army after punching his commanding officer in the face. That's partly true. I actually don't know I can't remember the exact story.
When are you guys playing again? When's that coming up?
Well, this podcast will have gone away by then. I think we're playing this coming weekend, the 11th. August the 11th is the next show that we have. And then we got a bunch of stuff after that tragically I never can keep it in my head and am pretty bad about writing it down in a calendar.
We'll try to get it in the notes.
Yeah, definitely.
So you...
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
So you just interviewed director Steve Bender or Binder? Sorry, I'm not familiar with this.
I think it's Bender.
Bender?
Yep.
Bender.
And of course, Darlene Love. All right.
Do what?
Darlene
Love. Yeah,
right?
Darlene Love. Both of them.
For the remake or the revisit of the.
This is the 50th anniversary of
Right, 50th,
Elvis's 68 comeback TV special, which was not called the 68 comeback. And like, I honestly, it's like weird how many people don't know that. It was called, I love this name. This is such a big name, such an important name. Singer, which was a sewing machine company, Singer presents Elvis. That was the name of the 68 comeback special. Yeah. And Elvis hated, Tom Parker wanted him to go on a tour after the TV special aired, and he had come back in the title somehow, and it made Elvis crazy because even though he had an awareness that his brand was maybe in danger because he'd been making real shit movies and had gotten in such a bubble so far away from what was actually happening in contemporary music at the time, he knew it, and there was a lot of concern. But
okay, I definitely Before we wrap up,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. Before we wrap up, part of your revelation of the uniqueness and beauty of Memphis came through you being a tour guide when there was before the Cassette Tape Brothers or whoever was.
Yeah.
In our podcast, we have not really touched on the Elvis component for whatever. I mean, it's just, but from your view, from your plateau, Elvis in Memphis, what's your take on it?
Well, that's a big question.
I know, but in our remaining moments here.
A child was born in Tupelo, Mississippi. That child would grow up to be Elvis Presley. He would change the world. Or as Sam Phillips would say, he would flat-ass change the world. We flat-ass changed the world. That was a quote from Sam Phillips to Jackson Baker in a cover story about Sam Phillips many moons ago. I don't know how to answer that in a kind of macro way because there are just so many aspects of him. I think it's really difficult for Memphis to understand exactly what he has meant to the city, and I think we get tired of hearing it, and we don't maybe even always want to hear it. And for the longest time, we tried to erase. Whether it was intentional or not, Memphis just didn't understand what it had, and was not doing anything to gild the lily, as it were. When Graceland first opens in the mid '80s, and I'll get the date wrong, I came to Memphis in '85. And Graceland had only been open for a year. I didn't realize when I started working there, because by the time I started working there in like 87, 88, maybe 88, 89, it felt like it had been there forever. It had already become a joke, kind of a cliche that, if you're going out, you got to go to Graceland. Graceland's, it's, that's where you get your kitschy souvenirs. So I didn't know it was so new. Let me think. I don't know. The music tourism in Memphis now is a multi-million, if not a multi-billion-dollar prospect. When Graceland opened, Sun Studio was empty-ish. There may have been something going on in there, but it wasn't music tourism related.
Right.
It wasn't music related. It wasn't torn down, but it wasn't activated in any way. I don't think they had yet torn down Stax, but so they opened Graceland. Graceland is pulling people in from all over the world, so naturally it's going to make sense to somebody. Let's go tear down Stax Studio. There were people like the same hippies that were preserving Overton, the Overton Park shell, the Levitt shell, who knew that you shouldn't tear down Stax. But progress, right?
Right.
So we've had to tear that down and rebuild it for people to really understand how valuable it was and what it meant to the world. So Graceland really showed Memphis, for whatever kind of good, bad, love-hate relationship we may have with Elvis Presley Enterprises, because Graceland is here. Elvis Presley Enterprises is not necessarily here. Ownership is maybe elsewhere, values are maybe elsewhere in some cases. But whatever you may think about Graceland or your opinions about them trying to get the city to give them money or whatever, I think it's important that we always understand that Graceland showed Memphis that just how much people valued the culture that came from here. It didn't show them soon enough. It didn't show them in time for them to not tear Stax down in the first place.
Yeah.
But its success is the foundation for the Stax Museum, for the revived Sun Studio, for the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, for us having the only Smithsonian exhibit outside of Washington D.C. with the Rock and Soul Museum. So while I feel like as a tour guide, my experience was unique, I think that Graceland also showed the whole city exactly what I was seeing. That there was this thing here that maybe we don't understand, and even if we don't understand it, we should pursue it. Well, maybe Elvis is that too. He can be really polarizing. I'll get really nerdy here because I'm really into rhetoric. And nobody ever says that. I'm so into rhetoric. But in rhetoric, you often use these models like Shakespeare or something else to have conversations about other things.
Uh-huh.
You're able to get at other things through pursuing one conversation or another. And I think I think at least at this point in the city's history, you can't really even talk about Memphis without thinking about Elvis and his impact on the city, on its economy. And there are probably pros and cons in every direction. But
right.
As far as what's the Elvis Memphis thing, I don't know. We should think about him critically more, and we should think about him, his meaning in the city more.
Yeah. Embrace it. Go ahead and take it in.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
that sort of felt like I'm not sure what I'm saying.
In moving here, the urban legend I heard was the family initially, Priscilla and everyone was kind of like weirded out by all the adoration. There was a turning of the curb to where it's like, this can be actually very fortuitous. This can be actually a huge enterprise. We should not be so. We should not consider this so weird and maybe distasteful, but go ahead and embrace this thing and actually, just take it all in.
A thing that that I discovered later, as a journalist, really talking to people, and the origins of Graceland is the thing it is now, is they didn't know. They had no idea it was going to be what it is.
Right.
They thought they were going to open up. They would have some, they'd be there for the fans. It would be, they knew that people were going to want to see it. They didn't know that it was going to grow into the thing that it became. That shocked the people at Graceland as much as anything else. So,
right.
So yeah, and I don't know, like distasteful. I don't know. I don't know what that even means, really.
I heard an NPR. This is years ago. Someone in charge of the branding and marketing licensing of Elvis,
right.
and NPR did a great interview of the person in charge, like the kind of like the gatekeeper of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to license with Elvis's image. And they asked, what were some of the requests you turned down? And the person from Graceland said, we had a request for a sprinkler head, an Elvis sprinkler head that would pop out of the ground. And I thought, I would buy that in a second. Like, just
Why not? Why not?
But still, I thought, a testimony to the power of Elvis.
So he creates this bigger than life, super heroic, over the top image, like right at the very end of his life,
right
in the 70s, when everything was, a little bit overdone, and it's funny, after the 68 comeback, the 68 comeback changed him, I think, in a lot of ways. He had, like, working with the movies, he would cut tracks with his rhythm section, and they would bring in all of the musicians to overdub it. He'd never really, like, sung live with an orchestra. He'd, like, not done a lot of this stuff. And by the time you get to the later concerts, he's got his band, he's got some symphony players, he may have like a couple of gospel choirs, and he's trying to fuse so many different kinds of American music into this, if Phil Spector was creating a wall of sound,
right?
Elvis was trying to make a big old wall of sound. I mean, he was just trying to make this thing. And so we talk about, to use the crass term, people sometimes talk about skinny Elvis and fat Elvis. And there was a big thing when the stamp came out,
Right,
is it going to be skinny Elvis or is it going to be fat Elvis?
I remember that, yeah.
Well, I don't like to think of fat Elvis in terms of his weight. But at one point, his, like, the sound and everything was so just gargantuan, and the look was gargantuan. He was a big fan of Captain Marvel Jr. comic books. He loved comic books, so like all the capes and all of that,
right,
that's all informed by superheroes, which, as the success of the movies show today, are also this deeply ingrained thing in American culture. But so you have this big bell-bottomed superhero with these enormous buckles. He creates this image that he can't outlive. And so we kind of put him to bed at this moment, and it makes it sometimes, I think, maybe hard to see what's a very complicated and complex story about a guy who really was just a dude. Yeah. A guy who was just a dude with this phenomena in his throat and this ability to connect with a song.
Right.
And we want to pile all this myth on it and all this stuff, and
that's what we do.
He just wanted to hang out with his friends and throw the football around.
Right.
So yeah. Was there a question?
I mean, as far as do you still cover like Elvis Week coming out? Like, are you still, do you kind of keep your thumb on the pulse of what's going on with that?
Well, I think, and partly by way of fly on the wall, that pop culture just falls under my purview. So, like, the good, the bad, and the ridiculously of Elvis, I try and, keep a little bit. But not just him, all of our local celebrities, whether it's, Jerry Lawler or Al Green or whatever. But Elvis is he's the big one, so he tends to show up way more often. And with Graceland really trying to up their game, and I think become much more of a year-round thing that may even have appeal to Memphians and people in the region, and not just tourists. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more stuff happening out at that guest house with concerts, like a recent concert by Marty Stewart.
Right.
Opportunities to see some pretty great performers in a really nice and intimate environment. So I cover a lot of that. Not from the business standpoint. Toby Sells and some of our other people handle the development and all of that. But as far as the entertainment goes, yeah, I always want to know what's going on. I'm a sponge for all kinds of entertainment culture, whether it's music, theater, fire, juggling. I don't care.
Cool.
I like it all.
Do you have anything else?
No.
I think we're feeling the natural.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
But my last question that I've been asking a lot of our what are your hopes for Memphis? If you were king of Memphis, and you were able to like do some quick decisions and let's right now do this, or just like you have aspirations, you have hopes. What are your hopes for Memphis?
My hopes are that we shrink down to a reasonable and right size for a non-sprawling city and rebuild all of our connective tissue so that people think in terms of walking, biking, mass transit, where all that stuff's not loser cruisers, but it's stuff to connect yourself actually with the things that are going on around you. Because when you get on the interstate or, and just live in a bubble between your gated area or just your whether it's actually gated or just gated in the way it's been developed. When you start getting on a pedestrian level in the city, you get to know it like you never knew it before. You see its people, you see things that are changing, you see new businesses that you didn't know were there before, you try out new businesses. And when communities aren't connected, people don't see that. They just drive by all of those things. And that's a thing that we lost, was a lot of our connective tissue. We would have these, quote, blighted places between places that were thriving. And we're seeing stuff like with Crosstown. Crosstown was a big linchpin. We're seeing stuff with like the Hotel Chiska. South Main was doing pretty well. The Central Business District was coming back. But in between those two areas, there was this big empty Hotel Chiska. Well, just connecting those things means the world.
Yeah.
Putting lights, they lit underneath the interstate where it passes over Main Street by Alcenia's.
Right.
So at nighttime, instead of it just being dark under that bridge and you come out of the convention center and you're like, well, I guess I can go south. If I go north, I'm going to get knocked in the head going under that bridge. Well, you don't think that anymore. So now you come out and you might want to go to Westies. You might want to go. Little things like reconnect us. And I think that the thing that I hope most for Memphis is that we find ways to reconnect. And I think that once we reconnect physically, we reconnect in a whole lot of other ways.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We're going to link all your goodies, and thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Yeah.
Sure, man. I like I said, I wanted to do this a long time ago, and I'm just really awful about setting a date.
But here we are.
Yeah, I mean, ask Charlotte. It took us like 10, 15 years to finally get married. So I actually came around to saying yes to you way faster than that.
Hope you enjoyed that time with Chris. We surely did. He's a very smart guy, come to find out. We already knew that.
I was super intimidated going into this.
Because we're just
playing at being journalists. Actually,
oh my gosh. He's a for real journalist. Although, like I said, a man of many hats, but he does them all well. Go hear the band. If you are in town, search out Papa Top. And
read his blog.
Read his blog, please.
Yeah,
yes.
Intermission Impossible.
And even engage with him on Facebook if you're brave enough to do that. Right. But thanks again to Chris. Thank you again to Snakebite Company, Redwire Audiovisual, and of course our beloved Ernestine and Hazel's,
where you can get the finest
Soul Burger.
That's, you can't even say it the finest because it's the only.
It's actually the only Soul Burger.
Soul Burger.
All right. Catch you in the next time.